Hello, everybody, and welcome. And thank you for joining us today. My name is McCarthy. I'm managing partner here with McCarthy and Co. Solicitors LLP, and I am joined today by John McCarthy. John is our litigation partner here in McCarthy and Co. and our specialist in personal injury and medical negligence claims. John, thank you for joining us today.
My pleasure.
Now, the purpose of our quick chat today was we have received a number of frequently asked questions that we encounter in relation to numerous different aspects of what we do here in the practice. And we thought it would be useful maybe to put together some of those frequently asked questions and put them to John and ask him to just go through his take on some of the things that come up regularly and that might be of use to you as you go through your journey in trying to find out how to resolve your particular issue. Today, we're going to look at holiday accidents and some questions that we regularly get in relation to holiday accidents. John, the first question that I suppose is a general one, and it's one we often get at the start of these things, is how do holiday accident claims work?
Well, I suppose the first distinction to make is to point out that obviously if you have an accident while staycationing, which is a kind of a big feature this summer because of the COVID crisis, then it's back to first principles, and it's the same as if you were going to work or anything else. If you have an accident on somebody's premises, then it's down to occupier's liability. If you trip on the street, then you're probably going to pursue the local authority. So the fact that you're on holiday doesn't really make any difference, and it comes down to first principles. Likewise, if you're in a road traffic accident and you're on holiday, then the usual rules apply. But if you're on holiday abroad, that's where things get a bit more complicated. And I suppose the rule of thumb is that if you get injured in a jurisdiction other than Ireland, then your first port of call is to seek compensation in that country. So if you get injured in Spain, then you pursue your case in Spain. If you get injured in Italy, in Italy. And in fact, most of the mainland European countries have got very restrictive compensation regimes compared to Ireland. And really only Ireland and England have got a fairly developed system where people get what I would think to be adequate compensation for their injuries. So if you have a very serious injury in Germany, for instance, I had a case recently where it would have been a very, very high value case. But here, the amount of compensation that it was applied because you apply the law of the country, the amount of compensation was dramatically less than the Irish equivalent. But so the first answer is you would usually, unless there was some provision to allow you to commence a claim in Ireland, have to commence the claim in the country where you were injured. But there are a number of pieces of legislation which are very beneficial to Irish people who have been injured abroad to get around that. And the first of those is the Package Holidays and Travel Trade Act, which is a piece of legislation that came into being in 1995 that came about by reason of European legislation. And essentially it means that if you have been injured while on holiday, which was a package which was prepared by a travel agent in this country, then you are entitled to pursue a claim in personal injuries against that travel agent in this country. And we regularly advance claims of that nature. But it's important to point out that it must be a package, so that if you go off and if you book your flights on Ryanair's website and you book your hotels on booking.com and all the rest of it, while you have made your own little package, if they've all been bought off individual providers, then there is no Irish travel agent that you can pursue. And it is actually worth considering when you are booking a holiday, because when I've looked at it, and I've actually gotten travel agents to prepare packages for me and then compared it to doing it yourself, there's not much in the difference. And you have that added layer of protection that if anything goes wrong, you have a cause of action against the Irish travel agent if you do suffer injuries on the package holiday. The other piece of legislation that gets you around the general rule that you must commence proceedings in the country in which you were injured is another piece of European legislation which is referred to plainly as Rome II. And that essentially means that if you're involved in a road traffic accident in another European country, then you can bring proceedings in this country against the insurance company for the driver in the other country must have a representative here for the purposes of dealing with claims, and then you can pursue your action against that representative in this country. So I suppose it's a complex area, but the long and the short of it is that if you're injured abroad, the first port of call is you have to issue proceedings in that country, but there may well be legislation that will enable you to bring a case in Ireland.
Okay, so that's very, very interesting, and it is complex, but it is important for people to understand that if they have been injured abroad, okay, their first port of call may be in the country where they're injured, but it would be worth making inquiries here first to see if it's something that they can possibly pursue here at home. And I suppose I would imagine the reasons for that would be, first of all, it's probably going to be a lot more convenient and easier for them to do that here. And second of all, am I right in thinking that if they bring the claim here, they will be pursuant to the Irish system in terms of compensation and so on, which might be more beneficial to them than if they were to do so maybe in another European country?
Well, again, it's a complex area, but particularly with regards to Rome 2, which is the one where, let's say you were in a road traffic accident in Germany or in Italy, then the level of compensation to which you're entitled is determined by reference to the law of the country in which you suffered the injury. There are a number of exceptions to that, but generally speaking, that's the rule. And as I said, if you suffer an injury in a mainland European country, they all have their different compensation regimes, but suffice it to say that they are dramatically less generous than if you were to suffer a road traffic accident in Ireland. So if you suffer serious injuries in a car crash in Germany, you will not recover anything like what you would recover in an Irish court. The only upside to that is that the Irish judges are allowed a degree of discretion in determining the local laws and how to arrive at the appropriate amount of compensation, and they generally do attempt, to the extent that they can, while sticking within the rules, to be as generous to the Irish injured parties so that they get as close as they would under the Irish rules. Now, obviously, they can't, disregard the local rules, but they do try, to the extent that they can, I would suggest, make sure that the person is adequately compensated.
Okay, so I guess just listening to that, then I think the general guidance that I would take from that would be to make inquiries here first as to what your rights are and whether it's something you can make.
If you've had an accident abroad, the first thing is to get onto an Irish solicitor who deals in personal injuries, ask them if it is one which they can deal with. If they can, they certainly will, and if not, they may well be able to refer you to somebody that they know in the other country that would be able to assist.
Okay, excellent. Now, and just again to clarify for people, because again this is a complex area and it's complex on many levels. But I guess so you will be talking in terms of other countries that Ireland, we may be able to operate the system that you mentioned in terms of bringing a claim here for an accident suffered abroad. That would be primarily EU countries, I take it.
Absolutely, it's the European Union. Everything I've discussed there is exclusive to the European Union, and one of the major benefits that we have as members of it. If you have an accident in the US, then there's nothing that can be done for you, unless it's actually in the course of travel by flight or by boat, which we can talk about later. But if you have an accident, a road traffic accident or any other kind of accident in a non-EU country, and let's remember that very soon that will include Great Britain, then unfortunately there is no legislation which will enable you to pursue compensation in Ireland.
I see. Yes. Okay. So this works. What we're talking about here, the special principles we're talking about bringing claims here for accidents that happened abroad relate exclusively to EU countries. Now, you mentioned the UK, and we might just touch on that very briefly because obviously we have the UK is leaving the EU, and so that will change. Currently, it's a member state of the EU. It will no longer be after the end of December 2020. And while we don't know exactly what the end of all of that is going to be at the moment, I suppose we do know that the UK will no longer be in the EU at the end of this year.
Exactly. No, I should point out that if you suffer an injury if you have suffered an injury historically, or are unlucky enough to between now and their exit, obviously there's what's going to happen with Brexit is just nobody knows, but I think it's safe to assume that you will still come within the existing rules and would be in a position to commence proceedings in Ireland under the legislation we just discussed, but it's anybody's guess from December onwards.
Excellent. So John, the next question that I guess we encounter quite regularly and that I thought I might like you to maybe give us your view on is just if I have an accident, if I suffer an injury in an accident on holiday, will my claim have to go to court?
No, is the short answer. It may well do, and some cases do. But the first port of call would be to make an application for assessment of damages to the Personal Injuries Assessment Board, which is a statutory body which was set up by the government nearly 20 years ago now, and which assesses claims if the respondent, which is the person that you're claiming off, agrees to it being assessed. Now, you will find that our experience is that in a lot of these accidents that happen in hotels or swimming pools or whatever, where there's a package holiday element to it, the travel agents, or more importantly their insurance company, will look at it, and if it's a case where it's fairly obvious that this is an injury that was caused by a defect or by some shortcoming on the part of the tour provider, they will allow to be assessed by the PIAB. So what happens then is you get seen by a number of doctors, and then the PIAB makes what's known as an assessment, which is a breakdown of what it believes you're entitled to for general damages for pain and suffering, and for special damages for monetary loss, such as medical treatment, loss of earnings because you couldn't go to work, etc. And then if you believe that the assessment is adequate, and if the insurance company for the travel agent believes that it's adequate, then both parties agree to it, and there's what's known as an order to pay issued, which is a legally binding obligation on the part of the travel agent to pay you your compensation. So there's every chance that if you have suffered an injury that it wasn't your fault and was down to some shortcoming on the part of the tour operator, that it will be dealt with in this manner without it ever seeing the inside of a courtroom. There are instances where a tour operator will suggest that they're not liable, and they'll decline to have it assessed by the PIB, and then you could end up in court proceedings. But generally speaking, you know, if you have a lawyer who knows what they're doing and they've investigated it and determined that there is a good stateable case, then in all likelihood your case will probably settle before it goes to trial. Well in excess of 90% of cases that are issued will, you know, settle before they get to court, and it's only those cases where liability is extremely you know, contested and where frankly you mightn't have a great case, or where you're being unreasonable about the amount of compensation that you're seeking, is where those cases don't get settled. But like I say, they're a very small minority of the cases that are actually commenced.
I see, and just again, everything I think you say kind of presupposes this, but I mean, if we're bringing a claim here for an accident that happened abroad, anywhere else in the EU, while on holiday or traveling for any other reason, we can use the injuries board the same as the Personal Injuries Assessment Board, the same as if we had suffered the accident here in Ireland.
Absolutely, and I should also just clarify, even though I'd hope it would be self-evident, you know, if you didn't resolve your case through the PIAB, then you would get an authorization and you would commence your claim through the Irish courts process. So the question of having to commence proceedings in France or in Germany or wherever the accident occurred.
So everything will be dealt with here at home.
Exactly.
Okay. Excellent. Now, okay, one of the other questions that we regularly encounter from many of the people making inquiries with us is who will pay the compensation for an injury sustained on holiday?
Well, I suppose the short answer is the person who's at fault, but generally speaking, all of these providers of services will have professional indemnity insurance from some commercial insurer. So the accident that you've sustained will ultimately be paid for by an insurance company that has provided cover to whomever is at fault.
So you're looking, it's essentially going to be the same as if you're dealing with an insured person who you've suffered an accident at the fault of here at home.
Exactly.
Now, another regular question that we encounter, and I'd be very interested for your thoughts on, are can you make a claim for holiday accident compensation without having travel insurance in place? Absolutely,
they're unrelated, and the fact whether or not you have travel insurance is irrelevant predominantly, except that if you do claim on your insurance policy, and if, for instance, your insurer pays for medical treatment or for any other outgoing that you've had to incur as a consequence of your injuries, then you're obliged as an insured person to recoup that money in the context of your claim against whoever is at fault. So let's say, for the sake of argument, you are involved in an accident, your insurance provider pays for medical treatment either here or abroad, which comes to several thousand euro, then you would ask them to provide details of what they paid on your behalf, and you would include that in your claim for compensation, and once you recover that, you would repay it to them. So the short answer is, if you don't have travel insurance, it doesn't matter, you're still entitled to be compensated. But if you do have travel insurance, you have to make sure that you recover what they paid out on your behalf.
Okay. John, if I have an accident while on holiday and it's my fault, can I still make a claim?
No, unfortunately. The whole principle underpinning the entitlement to be compensated is that there has been negligence or breach of duty on the part of some other person. Now, that's not to say that if you have some fault associated with the event that you're completely precluded. There's the principle of contributory negligence. So let's say, for the sake of argument, that you fall at a swimming pool and suffer a bad injury, then if you were inebriated at the time, that may well be looked at, and they might say, well, look, you know, it was excessively slippery, but you were drunk, and therefore you have to bear some of the fault for yourself. So we're going to reduce the amounts to which you're entitled by 20%, 30%. But you do have to establish fault on the part of whomever you're claiming against.
Oh, I see. So it's the same as here. We have a fault-based, negligence-based system, but we have this idea of, I think you mentioned, which was what we would call contributory negligence. That's something that will reduce the value of any claim you can bring, but it doesn't prevent you from bringing that claim in the first place.
Exactly.
Okay, can I claim compensation for an injury sustained at an airport or on an aircraft?
You can. There's a different. There's an international convention called the Montreal Convention that regulates that, and we're signed up to it. The rules that apply if you come under that regime are a little bit different to the general Irish rules. But in order to come within the Montreal Convention, you have to either be in the process of flying or embarking or disembarking a flight. And the general rule of thumb is that if you've gone through security, if you're within the actual secure area, you're deemed to be in the course of embarking. Likewise, if you haven't come out the other side of security after getting off the plane, you're still disembarking. Now, that is contested in many cases, but that's the kind of general rule of thumb. So if you are gone beyond security, and if you suffer an injury, if that's because of you slip on something on the ground when you're at Dublin Airport waiting for your flight, or if you're actually on the plane, you come under the provisions of the Montreal Convention. And one of the interesting provisions there is that, unlike what I've just said a moment ago, you don't have to establish fault. There's a strict liability regime. So as long as you can show that the accident was something external to you, in other words, if you pour a cup of coffee on yourself on the plane, then you're not entitled to be compensated. But if the person next to you, if the air hostess or steward, rams the trolley into your knee, then that is an accident outside of your control, and you don't have to establish that this was a negligent or there was some shortcoming on the part of the service provider. All you've got to show is that you were injured through this external event. So the rules are quite different, and whoever you're instructing has to be quite careful, because there are differing time limits and differing principles to a general claim for personal injuries in Ireland. But most certainly, if you are injured on a plane, or, as I say, in the process of either getting on it or getting off it, you are entitled to be compensated.
So, and that, I think you maybe refer to that. They sometimes talk about the air side of the of the thing. Once you've gone through the security, you're on the air side, and when you come out on the other side and you haven't come out through the passport check on the other side, I think, would that be the
We're still in the process of disembarking there. Now, there's a definition as to what disembarking is, and there have been a number of decisions which make reference to whether or not, in particular set of circumstances, that was deemed to be disembarking. But as I say, the rule of thumb is that if you're still within the secure area, and if you're kind of in the process of, going from the airplane to your car, but are still within the secure area, you're deemed to be disembarking. If, on the other hand, you are you were after getting out of the secure area and you were in the same field that anybody who was visiting the airport to pick up a friend or relative, for instance, and if you fell in that area, the Montreal Convention wouldn't apply, and you'd probably be looking at occupiers' liability against the air traffic operator.
Yeah, and that would be here in Ireland if that happened, let's say, in an Irish airport. But interestingly, though, just to finish off that point, let's say I'm flying from Dublin to New York, and I'm getting off the plane in JFK. What's my position there?
Well, if you're still in the process of disembarking and you're in the secured area, which is only allowed for people who are actually in the course of air flight, as opposed to visiting the airport, you'd probably still come within the application of the Montreal Convention, and you could claim in Ireland for an accident which happened in the American airport. But as I say, if you had gotten out to the main area where people let down area, then you'd be in the US and you'd have to pursue your case in that country.
So, okay, that's a very specific piece of international treaty law, I think, that covers air traffic. And did you mention that covers ship traffic also?
No, there's another convention that deals with that, and again there are different rules which apply, but you certainly can bring a claim in this country for an accident which you have on a ferry abroad, depending on if you're still in the course of the actual
traveling from this country. Okay, that's just very interesting and important for people to note that, because if it applies, there's a couple of very interesting provisions, particularly the fact that you don't have to prove liability and so on. Thanks for that, John. Now, another question that we often get is, can I claim compensation for food poisoning or for poor hotel standards when on holidays?
Well, for food poisoning, yes is the short answer, but unless it is a particularly nasty type of food poisoning which causes significant personal injuries, rather than just gastroenteritis where you're unwell for a number of days, then the amount of compensation to which you would be entitled would be quite small, and arguably there would be no great point in pursuing the case. And generally people will get onto you and they say, but it ruined my holiday, and I'd saved up all year and all the rest of it. And that is arguably the case, and I can imagine how it would ruin your holiday, but the amount of compensation that you would secure for that would be quite small, and probably wouldn't be worth proceeding with the case. There are some forms of food poisoning which can cause serious long-term damage, and if you suffer from any of those, then absolutely you're entitled to be compensated. The poor quality of the hotel accommodation or otherwise, it isn't something that you could deem to be a personal injury, so you really couldn't bring a case for a compensation for it. You might well want to make a complaint to the tour operator and see if they'll strike some deal with you whereby they'll refund you, but really there is no kind of compensation scheme for that kind of poor quality.
I see. And just in relation to the food poisoning, because I know that food poisoning, sometimes we do get inquiries about food poisoning on many levels, and I see that, I understand exactly what you're saying about the fact that they sometimes aren't, maybe the compensation that you might get for something that was a short-term thing that clears up completely might not warrant maybe engaging a solicitor to bring a claim, but there'd be nothing to stop a presumed person from lodging an application to the Personal Injuries Assessment Bureau themselves.
And I mean, if you can establish that it was down to poor hygiene or whatever, that you suffered from food poisoning, then that is a personal injury caused by somebody else's negligence, and the same principle applies if you broke your leg. My only point is that
it wouldn't warrant instructing a solicitor, because the amount you have to pay probably wouldn't cover the amount of compensation you'd receive. But it's just worth pointing out for people, I think, that they can bring that claim themselves if they wish to do that via the Personal Injury Assessment Bureau.
There are certain types of food poisoning which can have really catastrophic impacts on people. Some of the E. coli strains, ETEC, they can cause this terrible injury to the kidneys, which is long-term and can be fatal. If somebody suffers from that kind of really profound injury as a result of poor hygiene or failure to provide proper food preparation, then absolutely you're entitled to be compensated.
Okay. And again, same principles apply. We can pursue that here via an Irish solicitor for something that happened abroad, and that will be something to just inquire more about and find out about your entitlements in relation to that. So John, one of the questions we get in, I suppose, in the area of personal injuries all of the time, but particularly in this area also, or no differently from anywhere else, is what level of compensation can I expect for an accident, an injury that I suffered as a result of an accident that happened on holiday?
Well, as we described earlier in the discussion, that's particularly complex in this case because if you are relying on the provisions of Rome II, that treaty we referred to previously, and if all of the criteria that normally apply, then you look at the code for determining compensation, which applies to the jurisdiction in which you suffered your injury. So, as it happens, a lot of the mainland European countries have something similar to what we have, which is the Book of Quantum, which is a kind of a document which the Personal Injury Assessment Board looks at when deciding on what the appropriate level of compensation is. And each of the countries have got differing and completely unharmonized rules as to what you are entitled to recover for personal injuries. And as I said earlier, compared to the Irish levels, the amount that you would secure in most mainland European countries is quite low. And it's really impossible to say in this discussion what you would be entitled to for a specific injury. You generally will find that you may have to go and get a formal legal opinion from the equivalent of a solicitor in that country. So you would get all your medical reports, and you would get the expert lawyer in France or Germany or Spain to apply their local law to your injuries, and then they would give you an assessment of what the damages you were entitled to were.
Okay. So the assessment of damage question is different to straightforward accidents that have happened here in Ireland. But again, something that you just need to get advice on, and in a case that, an Irish solicitor can advise you and assist you in getting the necessary information you need to be able to quantify the damages you're entitled to.
If you have somebody who's working in this area in Ireland, they will usually have a panel of experts in each of the European countries so that they can, get the appropriate opinion from somebody whom they know that they're talking about.
Okay, and I guess this area, is slightly more specialized than you might find for the general run-of-the-mill kind of personal injury kind of compensation claim for a straightforward kind of road traffic accident that happened here locally in Ireland. So for this type of more specialized, it is important to have somebody who knows what they're doing and has a network of people who they can contact to find out how to do this properly.
Exactly.
Okay. John, thank you very much indeed. Appreciate your time today.